Amen. Hey, we should do something where instead of posting it as a podcast, we should have a conversation, and we'll get a transcript of it. And if you would like it delivered to your home by carrier pigeon, Pony Express, we can have a sign up outside. So in the last lecture, we looked at the nature of technology. Let me just give my definition again as the God-given ability of mankind to create tools and instruments and artifacts to aid us in the fulfillment of our mandate, to image our Creator and to fill, subdue, and express dominion over creation. But we ended in looking at the ways in which digital technology may pose some different problems, pitfalls, and difficulties for wise engagement. So this assessment leaves us asking questions of what we should do in relation to the digital revolution. As I mentioned earlier in the first lecture, there are often two somewhat thoughtless responses in relation to technological advancement. The first is an uncritical acceptance and adoption of all technology, and the second is a more pessimistic view that leads many to wonder if outright rejection is truly the way forward. You could call that the Amish option. However, I don't think that either of these extremes is actually the most beneficial or realistic option for us as followers of Christ. We need to ask the questions if there's a way to engage that embraces the reality of technological advancements as goods while understanding the particularly unique difficulties and propensities of digital technology. What I hope to do in this lecture is offer somewhat of a way forward. None of these principles will be revolutionary in themselves, but I do believe that if thoughtfully embraced, they will provide a helpful framework in which to critically and intentionally engage with hopes of growing in wisdom and overcoming some of the more destructive tendencies that are found in the widespread use of digital technology. So the first principle and practice that I think that we need to embrace related to the idea of digital technology in particular is to recognize what we are fighting against. As I argued at the end of the last lecture, I think that there is reason to believe that there are in fact spiritual principles and spiritual realities at work behind the ways that technological engagement is unfolding in our world. If this is true, if there is in fact some aspect in which the powers or spiritual beings are animating the reality of the technological revolution in our day, then for us to break free from the places where it entangles us or affects us in detrimental ways will require that we begin with a spiritual response in our lives. In talking to many Christians who are aware of the hold that technology has over them and who are wondering what in the world they should do about it, there's often a sense of hopelessness or confusion or cloudiness that surrounds the issue itself. This is because there are, in fact, beneficial, helpful, and useful parts of these technologies and what they serve in our life. But we're also aware of the ways that there seem to be an unnatural power behind them to distract us, to ensnare us, or just dilute our labors and attentions in ways that we know are outside of what God has for us, and sadly are often outside of what we desire for ourselves. So this leads us, if you're anything like me, to a discouraged endeavor to try and figure out how to actually disentangle from the more destructive aspects of technology, while understanding the ways in which it is both helpful and at times is necessary to retain aspects of these technologies. Sometimes in moments of particular hopelessness, I will actually look at Abby, my wife, and wonder if we just need to become Amish. There is a feel about these things that makes it really hard to discern where the helpful ends and where the entangling or the ensnaring begins. It feels like if you start pulling the thread in one place, the whole garment cannot help but fall apart, leaving you with nothing but a piece of land in some rural area removed from civilization, a plow, and maybe a chicken coop. But the more I've thought about the topic and the more I've tried to assess it with spiritual eyes, the more I've come to see this issue as an issue of spiritual warfare. I think the ways that many people experience this as cloudy and confusing and hopeless isn't first and foremost a sign that there's no way forward in the issue outside of some stark posture of rejection or abstaining, but rather that there are powers at work related to this issue that are beyond simple answers. Wisdom is going to be hard fought here because there's a lot at stake. This is one of the primary places, in my opinion, where the rulers and powers of this age are pressing down upon us in our contemporary moment. This shouldn't create in us a spirit of hopelessness, but rather it should give us an opportunity to see what really is in order that we might take steps to fight it accordingly. Far from being a simple, natural assessment of technology from like a purely pragmatic or practice level issue, we must see the truth that there are animating realities that lie behind their intense momentum and their effects in our world. I wonder what would be different about our relationship to digital technology if we began to view it as spiritual warfare, more than just something we had to figure out or something that we had to white-knuckle our way through. As Christians, we know the powerful truth that Christ has won the decisive victory over the powers and the rulers of this age, over the supernatural forces that animate and lead the course of societies and cultures and institutions and individuals. He disarmed them in reality at the cross and is seated right now far above them at the Father's right hand and is working to empower his church to walk in victory as his body in the world. So how would we step toward engaging this issue as spiritual warfare, even as we, walk out of the room tonight? First, I think one of the most dynamic ways that we can walk toward victory is to recognize that we're at war. Knowing that this is a battle not of flesh and blood will orient our labors and our efforts to utilize different weapons to fight with. When writing to the Corinthians, Paul makes this point very clearly when he tells them that we're not waging war according to the flesh. Therefore, the weapons of our warfare are not of flesh. If this is a spiritual battle at the most fundamental level, then it requires spiritual weapons, spiritual eyes, even spiritual strategies. This doesn't mean that there won't be specific places or practices or steps we take, but I do think it would be a really good starting place. Second, I think that we should begin to take up something that is true in regards to this issue that Paul says to Timothy, that we have not been given a spirit of fear or timidity, but of power and love and of self-control, or some translations say a sound mind. I think this verse is a powerful weapon in our arsenal as we think through approaching this. What would be different about your tech usage and your engagement of how you took steps forward if you stood firm in the truth that Christ has not given you a spirit of fear or a spirit of confusion, but has given you everything you need to walk in the power of his victory with soundness and sobriety of mind and self-control? What if a couple times a day, and I don't care at what level you're struggling to navigate these things, if this is in the seemingly trivial camp, doom scrolling, YouTube shorts, quick hit dopamine rushes, or if you're struggling with the more toxic expressions of tech use, you're addicted to social media, you're shaped by its power and allure to hook your affections and shape your images of what's good and true, you're addicted to pornography. I think this could be powerful at any of these levels. What if a couple times a day you started to look at your phone? And I don't mean look on your phone, I mean literally set it on the table in front of you, off. And you started to talk to the Lord about how he's giving you all that you need to walk in wisdom, in power, and sobriety of mind with regards to this thing. What if you began to thank God and then ask him to make this more of a reality in your experience? That he has won the victory over the animating powers that work to direct the course of your own relationship with technology. And then ask him to give you wisdom, power, courage, and self-control. You could, in practice, couple this with something that I like to do at times that I've taken up from Romans chapter 6. In this passage, Paul exhorts the Romans to present themselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. He then reminds them that in doing this, sin will have no dominion over you. I like to do this at various times in my life, and it's a practice that I've done for many years. I'll take time and I will literally work through my body and present them to God as alive from the dead. I will talk about my mind. God, here I am, here's my mind, alive from death, use it for righteous purposes. My eyes, my tongue, my ears, my hands, my heart, I just literally work through myself before God and say, this I offer to you as a sacrifice. Will you help me to use them for righteousness today? What if you started doing that in regards to how you use your phone? I present myself as alive from death. Here are my members, use them for righteousness. The promise of the scripture is that in doing that, sin will not have dominion over you. It's a glorious promise. Lastly, I think one of the greatest ways forward for us is to simply and consistently talk to the Lord about it. If you struggle to know where the helpful ends and the destructive begins, if it feels like thorns are growing up in the garden of your heart and you don't know how to take the weeds out without pulling up the plant, ask the one that does. Ask the Lord for wisdom. And the promise of his word is that he will give it. And when he does, set your heart to obey and walk in what he has said, no matter the cost, or if it's more intense than you would like it to be. The second broad principle that I think we need with relation to digital technologies, if we're going to walk in wisdom and prudence in relation to them, is to create. And I think you should do this both at the individual level and for families in the room, you should do this at the family level. Create a type of technology manifesto. A manifesto is simply a declaration of values and aims and policies that define how you are going to engage or relate to something in your life. I think one of the most difficult realities related to the whole digital revolution, specifically as I've watched it unfold personally over the last 15 years, particularly since the invention of the iPhone, is that many of us have been caught completely unaware because we didn't know that we needed to think through our values, our practices, our aims, or our principles related to technology. So with many of these, we just accepted them, either because we didn't really spend the time to think critically about them, or because we believed we had to, right? Either to function within the modern world or just because it was cool and everybody else was doing it. And we ended up taking things on whole, hook, line, and sinker. But the beautiful thing is that it's not too late. We can take time to think through what we desire, we can give expression to it, and then we can order our lives towards those ends. Yes, it may cost us some in the short term, and that's hard, but the short-term cost will ultimately bear a lot of fruit in our lives 5 years from now, when our lives look more like we desire them to, rather than just finding ourselves further entrenched or further ensnared. If, again, the ideal purpose of technology in our lives is to aid us in fulfilling God's mandate to image him and to fill, subdue, and express dominion over the creation, then you should think through what it means for you to run after this and then order your tech use accordingly. Again, I've mentioned his name a couple times. I've personally loved over the last several years, Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism. I'd highly recommend it for anybody that wants a resource of how to step into a thoughtful approach to engaging technology. I love his philosophy of technology as he outlines it in the book. He argues that we should essentially focus our online time on a small number of carefully selected and optimized activities that strongly support the things you value, and then happily miss out on everything else. This idea implies a few things. First, it implies that we know what we value. Values are key. Values are the things that we believe ultimately matter, ultimately give us success, and ultimately help us to play a meaningful part in the community that we're a part of. However, the problem with values is often twofold. Number one, many of us don't actually know what we value. We've never stopped to think through what actually matters to us. What do we think success looks like? And we've never taken the time to ask if those things actually matter or actually bring true success. So the first problem is that we don't take time to define our values or to honestly assess if they are worth valuing. We may discern that we value having a lot of money or a big home or being the best athlete or something. But we also need to ask the question, is this actually worth valuing? So we need to spend some time generally thinking about what matters to us. What do we desire in life? And ultimately then asking God to speak to us through his word to measure those things under, do they actually matter in light of eternity? The second problem with values is often that our stated values, what we think we want, and our real values, what we actually want, are not quite the same. This is expressed in the places where we think what we think we want, we don't do, and our actual behaviors betray a different set of desires. So the first thing we need to do is spend time assessing what we value in life, and then ask an honest question. Does my technology use promote my values or conflict with my values? However, I actually don't think asking those questions is enough. We need to ask another set of questions that goes beyond a simple value question to an honest look at the best option. This is when Newport says to optimize accordance with your values. He adds in his book, but by not asking only does this technology support and propel my values, but is this particular technology, think of a particular app or a particular platform, is it the best option for expressing that value? What this means is allowing ourselves to look at how we are using a particular part of technology and being willing to ask if this is actually serving our value in the best manner. Again, we may actually have a value to stay connected to Aunt Bessie, and that could be a really good, beautiful value. So we think we need Facebook. However, would we have the courage to look at the reality that Facebook rarely actually helps me to connect to Aunt Bessie, but regularly eats my time, inflames me with anger and envy and rage? So I need to be willing to ask, does this expression of technology best serve what I deeply value? Or is there a different way that can better express this value? We need to be willing to ask these kind of questions all over the place and be willing to make hard decisions, costly decisions, to align our lives with what God values for our life and then use our technology accordingly. Okay, the third principle that I think we have to adopt is to draw lines or boundaries and keep them. One of the things that we're often too late to talk about is the need to draw clear lines that we will not cross and then have the integrity not to cross them. Contemporary Christians don't like to talk about drawing lines because it makes us feel like we're fundamentalists or something. Hey, you need to draw lines and then not cross them. You need to know where the lines are so that you don't cross them and you can stay far away from them. The hardest thing in the world, and so many of us are in this place, it's because we haven't thoughtfully and intentionally worked through these things, we find ourselves way on the other side of the line, and it's super hard to get back. So you need to find, where's the line that I'm not going to cross? I think each of us needs to have clear boundaries that define the limits of our technology use. And I'm not just talking about sinful practices either. Those are cut and dry. Flee from them. I'm talking about the places where these devices work their way into the crevices of our lives. And before we know it, they've taken up residence in ways we don't desire them to. When I think about drawing lines or boundaries, I think in two broad areas. First, I think about lines that govern the win issues of technology. We've done a lot of work in this as a family, particularly with relation to our children, as they've walked into young adulthood, and we're trying to help teach them proper use within our own home for a couple years. But we have really clear lines that we don't cross. Our kids don't get phones until they're driving. There are clear boundaries when they're off limits, what time of day, and how they can use them, when and where and in what manner. Recently, this is fun, as a part of reestablishing goals and values in the new year, we have the four of us that have phones in the house have set a marker of non-essential screen use for each of us at less than 30 minutes a day. It's been a really fun and formational pursuit as we check in with each other regularly, at least once a week, but oftentimes throughout the week to see how we're doing. It's amazing. It's actually taken on this kind of competitive feel, and my boys love it. They've loved it. So think about win situations with regards to boundaries and drawing lines. How much do you honestly want to be on your phone a day? Set it and then do it. Are there times when you don't want to use it? Put your phone to bed at 9 p.m. and don't look at it again till the morning. I also think we have to ask some boundary questions related to the what of technology. Namely, what technologies will you and will you not use? With how fast technology continues and will continue to develop and change, I think we need to do some work as Christians to ask serious questions as to what our lines are that we will not cross. Maybe for you, one of these is like social media. I'm not going to use social media. I'm not going to use these certain realities. There needs to be, for us also, I think, some significant forethought related to technologies like AI. When or how, or is it appropriate to use? Are there lines that we should not cross? Or technologies like Neuralink and other augmentations that are on the horizon. And they're going to be here and they're going to proliferate before we know it. We're going to blink and that's going to be reality. Although we can't develop this fully here, we likely need some other places to discuss some of these in the days to come. We do need to think about our values and aims and principles so that we can make informed and wise decisions. And these decisions need to be able to assess the broader implications and realities of these technologies far beyond the initial appeals to all the ways that they are going to help people. They're always presented as this is good, this is beneficial, this is an unmitigated good thing. And we need categories to evaluate critically the effects and do they line up and serve the purposes that God has for me, for my family, for us as the people of God. The next principle is somewhat related to drawing lines and keeping them, but takes on a bit more of maybe like a positive pursuit in response to those lines. I believe Christians need to, in the moment we find ourselves, intentionally seek to create in your own life and then maybe corporately at times, what I'm starting to call digital deserts. You see, we're not the first Christians who have ever had to deal with the world changing rapidly and with trying to navigate the temptation to be conformed to the world through over-engagement or through ease and comfort. Early on in the church's history, after several centuries of persecution and hardship and opposition, Christianity was actually made the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, for many of us, we might look at something like that and think that it was nothing but a beautiful thing. But to many Christians who lived through that massive transition, they began to realize that for all of the good that came with Rome's acceptance of Christianity, it also brought with it an increased propensity to lose hunger for God, to lose one's soul in gaining the world. In response to this, there was a movement of Christians in the late 4th century who began to flee society and live in the desert with a very particular and specific vision: to remove themselves from the noise, the comforts, and the alluring powers of the world in order to meet God. One of these early desert fathers, as they're often known, was a man by the name of Arsenius. He was a Roman senator that left his place of high status and fled to the desert to seek the Lord. It's said that once, as he prayed that the Lord would show him the way of salvation, the Lord spoke to him, "Arsenius, flee, be silent, pray always, for these are the sources of sinlessness." Now, I'm not saying that we should flee to the deserts or to rural communes or go the way of the Amish, as glorious as they may sound from time to time. Hey, and just know they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be as glorious as you imagine them. But I am saying that we should intentionally create in our lives digital deserts for the purpose of fleeing from the world, being silent before God, and cultivating a deep life of prayer and communion with Him. I actually believe one of the greatest dangers of our digitalization, the connectivity, the distractedness, the vying for our attention, is not only found in the most toxic forms of perverse tech use that have been introduced into our world. Those are evident, they're more easy to see. Rather, I think one of the greatest dangers of the kind of frog in the pot growth of our technological revolution is that we've grown accustomed to an omni-connectivity, that we've filled our lives with noise and distraction and things that tantalize us and captivate our senses. And that these things are at times fundamentally opposed to a life of communion with Christ, with meditation in His Word, with contemplation of His glory and His splendor. Because of this, I think that we need to create places to flee from the world. And I think that it first looks like fleeing from always being connected, always being available, always being a short reach away from the numbing and dulling ourselves that we can distract ourselves by. One of my favorite quotes on the Desert Fathers comes from an author named Thomas Merton, and he wrote that society was regarded by these men as a shipwreck from which every single individual man had to swim for his life. These were men who believed that to let oneself drift along, passively accepting the tenets and values that they knew as society, was purely and simply a disaster. I believe this is all the more true in our digital world. To passively drift along is to shipwreck. I believe this with all my soul. So create places to flee that are digital deserts. Hey, create a literal place in your home where you never take your phone. Maybe it's a bedroom. Maybe it's a study. Have screen-free zones in your life and intentionally, at times, flee to those places. And flee to them for the purpose of silence, both actual silence and digital silence. One of the most important spiritual disciplines that we can practice in our time is silence. This is a historical practice of Christian brothers and sisters throughout the ages, and one that I think we desperately need. We live in a world that is inundated with noise, and it never goes away. And I don't just mean sound waves, but the digital noise of notifications and emails and scrolling and wondering where that person is and seeing if they've posted something, and on and on and on. In 1981, Henry Nouwen wrote, "Over the last few decades, we've been inundated by a torrent of words. Wherever we go, we're surrounded by words, words softly whispered, loudly proclaimed, angrily screamed, words spoken, recited, sung, words on records, words in books, words on walls, words in the sky, words in many sounds, many colors, many forms, words to be heard, read, seen, glanced at, words which flicker off and on, move slowly, dance, jump, and wiggle. Words, words, words. They form the floor, the walls, and the ceiling of our existence." 1981, 26 years before the iPhone. Another contemporary author, in a book called The Power of Silence, Against the Dictatorship of Noise. You should buy it just for the title. He states, it's a vitally important thing to withdraw to the desert in order to combat the dictatorship of a world filled with idols that gorge themselves on technology and material goods, a world dominated and manipulated by the media, a world that flees God by taking refuge in noise. It's necessary to help this modern world have the experience of the desert. There we get some distance from everyday events. We can flee the noise and the superficiality. So flee, get away from your devices in order to get quiet, ultimately so that you can pray and meet with God Almighty. One of the themes that we see again and again throughout the scripture is that God takes his people, both individually and corporately, into the wilderness so that he can speak with them. We often need to be taken to places or to go to them ourselves where we're removed from the hustle and bustle of the world, from the noisy and the chaotic and the distracted. It isn't that God isn't there, it's that we don't listen. We fill our ears with other sounds, with distractions, with so many hits of connectivity that the ears of our souls are clogged, and we cannot hear the voice of our Father, who often whispers in a still, small voice. So, create some digital deserts in your life. Like I said, have some screen-free zones that you flee to. Maybe consider, this is something I've toyed with, and maybe I just need to jump in and do it. Have an iPhone Sabbath. Literally, turn your cell phone off on Saturday night before you go to bed, and don't turn it back on until Sunday at bedtime. Maybe there are all sorts of objections that fire in you about this, all the things that you'll miss out on, the things that you won't see, the things you won't do, that you won't be a part of. What if someone thinks you're slighting them because you don't text them back within 2 minutes or 2 hours or 2 days? Hey, if that's the case, you need to disappoint people in your life more often. Hey, what if that didn't happen? It's not the end of the world. Also, start practicing and learn how to practice solitude and silence in the presence of the Lord. Get into a place where you're alone and quiet with him, not in a 10-minute blitz out the door in the morning, not to check a box, not to fulfill an obligation. He is the source of living water, and living communion with him is like a spring of life that bubbles up into deep satisfaction, contentment, joy, and life everlasting. What would you not give up to drink from that fountain? Next, this is specifically for parents in the room. We need to make commitments to keep our kids. While your children are in your home, you've been given a responsibility and a stewardship to first protect them from the destructive tendencies of digital technology, and second, to train them in proper use. The first thing this means is coming up with distinct boundaries. Like I mentioned earlier, for your children. We set this a long time ago with each of our kids, that they didn't get a personal device until they're driving, and we absolutely don't budge on it. They know it's not up for debate, and actually, I want you to know this is possible. They appreciate it. They see it. Our older kids look back and like it, and our younger child understands it. Now, each of my kids, this is interesting, the 2 that are over 16 and the 1 that's still under, have all of them been the last of their friends to get a device. And there's been ways that this is difficult. It's provided a lot of opportunities to have conversations on why we make the choices we do, what our hopes were in making this choice. But they have all agreed with the choice. I don't say that to boast in our parenting or brag on our kids. I say that to tell you it's possible, to give you courage. Hey, come up with clear principles and ways of relating to technology as a family and walk them out. We did this with about every use of screens in our homes. We had clear lines around video games and movies and all of those realities, and we kept them. And here's the reason. Parents, it's your responsibility to be the gatekeeper for your children with relation to digital technology. How you use it. Giving them an iPad to entertain them at 3 years old so you can cook is going to dictate their relationship to it for the rest of their lives. You should be very thoughtful and very rigorous in how you do it. One of the things that I've noticed over the last decade or so, and this has been really brought home to me in reading Jonathan Haidt's book called The Anxious Generation, is that we've turned the whole world of kind of on its head in relation to parenting. And I think it's actually starting to bear fruit that we're seeing as wildly destructive and detrimental to our kids. Haidt notes that parents have become inordinately protective in the real world and are almost completely permissive in the virtual world. I believe that it should be almost completely the other way around. This may not make sense in a lecture on technology, but I think one of the ways that parents can actually protect their kids in relation to technology is by letting up a bit in the real world. There has been an overemphasis on safetyism that has led to this proverbial helicopter parenting everywhere. So how do we keep our kids protected in the digital world? It may not seem evident on the surface, but let them climb trees a little bit higher than you want them to. Let them, when it's appropriate, and it's probably a little earlier than you think, just use common sense here, but let them roam the neighborhood, wander around a little bit bored. Screens are always a more enjoyable option, but if they aren't an option, there are a lot of great things that our kids can get into. So draw some lines, communicate them, keep them with your kids, tell them why, and let them have a little more freedom in the real world. Okay, the last principle that I want to give us. I could give 5 more. I'm really bummed about this. Is to make it your aim to be in real places with real people. One of the destructive results of our digital revolution is that we actually can lose the ability to be in actual places with actual people. We all kind of know the stereotypes. I remember vividly a really funny, humorous, and sad story. Being at breakfast with a member of our church, we were just down the street near the hospital, right around the shift change. I remember a group of nurses coming into the restaurant, sitting down, ordering their food, and being captivated by the reality that they weren't talking to each other. All of them were on their phones, apparently catching up on everything that they missed overnight during their 12-hour shift. It came to a particular point of entertainment for me and sadness when the food came. One of the girls, set her food up and started to take pictures. The first one, it seemed, did not do the trick. So she moved some things around, tried a slightly different angle. Second one, not quite what she wanted, it seemed. After several rearrangements and different camera angles, I kid you not, she stood up on her chair to get a shot from directly above. Here she is with a group of her coworkers in a restaurant, more concerned with how the image was captured than she was with the food itself. I mean, it was getting cold, for crying out loud. Or the people that she was with. Hey, even last night, this hit home for me in a really sad way. We were in Topeka for my boys' basketball games, and I looked over during the game, the other team's section, thankfully, and realized that not a single person in the section was actually looking at the game. Every one of them was on their phone. Now, I'm not trying to pass judgment. I'm trying to illustrate something that we're all aware of at some level, and something that becomes really easy to slip into and participate in. It's the tendency to leave the place where we are to be somewhere else with other people, places that are not real, and with people who, at least for the moment, are not real or really with us. I think we should fight against this however we can. Make it your ambition to be present with the people you are with and have the experience of the places where you are without the ever-present impulse or the need to share them with the whole world. News flash, Instagram is not real. It's not real. Our experience in the world is not better because 15 people saw that you did it, or 15 million people for that matter. It isn't better. Not at all. Maybe sometimes put your phone away. Don't feel the need to capture every moment. Maybe just live it. Fight the urge to curate your life and then mediate it through the device in your pocket. You know, we never actually might know what God might have for us in the places where we actually are. I want to close our time by relating a particular teaching of Jesus to the issue of technology in our day. And much of what I've said tonight is actually corrective. It's looking to provide a needed ballast to us in the midst of the inundation of these things into our world and the overwhelming feeling of drowning that I think many of us have. I do believe that the answer is not a wholesale rejection of technology. I think that many of these advancements provide gifts for us as people that I have no desire to revert to some former state of primitive technology to find, some utopian or idyllic world. But when it's all said and done, although some of us might have a proclivity towards a curmudgeonly spirit, and when I say us, I mean me, I doubt this is really the problem that we're going to have on the whole. What I do think we're going to struggle with more is how to thoughtfully and critically evaluate these things. And then I think we're going to struggle with actually paying the cost to live in line with our convictions over time. But I think we have to do this work. I think for the sake of our culture, for our civilization, for our families, and for our own souls, it is too important for us to not do it. Jesus asked a striking question, one that I actually think should rattle around in our hearts when we think about technology. He asked, "What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? Or what will a man give in return for his soul?" There is a promise intrinsic to the technological revolution that through this power, mankind will gain the world, will gain access to knowledge, information, connectivity, ease, comfort, entertainment. However, we are seeing more and more that many of these gains come with a great loss. Many of us and many around us, we find, are losing something greater than all the gains could ever give. We're losing what it means to be human. We're losing our ability to sit, to commune with God, to slow down, to focus, to be in real places, to be with real people, to have real experiences. Essentially, we're losing our souls. So with eyes that are wide open and hearts that are humble before the Lord, we need to ask Him to show us the way forward and to give us the grace and the courage to walk in His way, so that even in places where it may look like we have to lose aspects of our life, we ultimately may find true life in Him, life that is everlasting. Amen.